What's good, Cubers? It's your boy Matt, and I'm back with another card of the week. I want to give a shout out to the boys over at Solely Singleton for hipping me to this card, and I figured the least I can do was pass it on to you, so let's get started. This week's card of the week is Hidden Stockpile. For Orzhov, you get an enchantment that has Revolt. At the beginning of your end step, if a permanent you controlled left the battlefield this turn, create a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token, pay 1, sacrifice a creature, scry 1. Now, this card does not look super powerful at first glance, but it does have some interesting interactions. First, I want to point out the word permanent on the card. If a permanent you control left the battlefield this turn, you get a 1/1 colorless servo. There's a lot of upside on the fact that it counts permanents and not just creatures. And the second thing I want to point out is the sacrifice and scry ability. So the card actually has everything it needs on it to generate the tokens. You can sack a creature to scry 1, and then at the end of your turn, you create a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token. So everything you need to activate the card is already on it, which is a huge upside. Let's compare this to other cards in the Orzhov guild. Anguished Unmaking and Vindicate are the top tier of Orzhov. They both have the same casting cost, 1 in Orzhov, and they exile or destroy a permanent. So what you have at the top end of the Orzhov guild ladder are just 2 quality removal spells. Now, if you're curious about which one is better, it's Anguished Unmaking because it's at instant speed. The 3 life is worth paying for instant speed, and it exiles. Vindicate just destroys. Still, both really solid removal spells, and in a vacuum, Hidden Stockpile is just not as good as these 2 cards. It's just not. Let's look at the other Orzhov staples real fast. Sorin, Lord of Innistrad, is 2 in Orzhov for a Planeswalker that pluses to make a 1/1 black creature token with lifelink on the battlefield, and then you can -2 him immediately the turn you play him to get the emblem, which is nice. Creatures you control get +1/+0, and his final ability is to -6 destroy 3 target creatures and or planeswalkers, and then return each to the battlefield under your control. Now, at first glance, Sorin doesn't have a lot of interactions with Hidden Stockpile. You can plus him to make a vampire token, and then if that token dies on your turn, you can make a servo to replace it, which is nice. Or you can sack the vampire token to scry, and then at the end of the turn make the servo. But those interactions aren't fantastic, they're just good. The other Orzhov staple is Tide Hollow Sculler. For Orzhov, you get a creature, artifact, zombie, etc., etc. When he enters the battlefield, target player reveals their hand, you choose a non-land card from it, and you exile that card, and then they get that card back when Tide Hollow Sculler leaves the battlefield. And he's a 2/2. And again, we don't see a lot of interactions here with Hidden Stockpile. So this begs the question, why would we play Hidden Stockpile over any of these cards? And I think the answer is that Hidden Stockpile is more of a archetype card and less of just a generic strong card. So why would you want to play Hidden Stockpile? Let me give you one good reason. Aristocrats. Hidden Stockpile functions great in an Aristocrats build because when your creatures die off, Hidden Stockpile will replace them with a servo token. And then you get Cruel Celebrant, Blood Artist, or Zulaport Cutthroat triggers as your creatures die. If only there was a way for you to sack creatures so that you could generate the servos on your own. Oh, that's right. Look at Hidden Stockpile's last ability. You can sack the creature to scry. And what this means is you can sack a creature, trigger the Cutthroat or the Celebrant, gain a life, your opponent loses a life, you get a scry, and during your end step, you replace the creature you sacrificed with a colorless servo artifact creature token, which allows you to do the whole thing again the following turn. As if all of that wasn't enough, because you have the sack outlet on Stockpile, you can sack your creatures off in response to any kind of exile effects to help protect them. I do want to point out, pay attention to the wording on Stockpile. It says at the beginning of your end step. So if during your end step your opponent lightning bolts one of your creatures, they will have missed the Hidden Stockpile trigger because it happens at the beginning of your end step, which is a small downside, but I still think in general you're going to get a lot of incidental value, and having that sack outlet is going to be huge. But I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, like, Matt, I don't run an Aristocrats package. Like, I don't need to play this card. And that's true, you don't have to. But there are some incidental cube interactions for Hidden Stockpile that you might not be thinking about. Greater Gargadon is a great example of this. Now, I know he's not what he used to be. You know, that he's a 9/7 vanilla, and that body is not all it was cracked up to be. But you can, during your main phase, sack a permanent for the Gargadon, and then during your end step, get a servo and sack that for the Gargadon as well, and help speed along the process of getting him onto the battlefield. And you may not have thought about it, but fetch lands actually interact really well with Hidden Stockpile. You crack a fetch land during your turn on your main phase, you go get a land, but you've triggered the stockpile, and now you get a servo token in addition to whatever land you fetched. Also, Hidden Stockpile interacts really well with Restoration Angel, any kind of blink effect, because it exiles a permanent temporarily from your side of the field and then brings it back for value, and you get a servo token. So there's also value to be had there. In addition to that, think about what happens if you play Hidden Stockpile on turn 2. Just incidental value. How much of your stuff just dies during a normal game of Magic? Creatures die, enchantments get removed, artifacts die, lands get cracked. All of these things interact with Hidden Stockpile and give you a servo token. So there's a lot of little incidental interactions inside of a game of Magic and inside of your cube that will interact well with Hidden Stockpile. Which brings us to, is Hidden Stockpile cubable? And I actually think that it definitely is. I think you should try Hidden Stockpile. I have been very impressed with the way it interacts inside of my cube. First of all, everything you need to use the card is on the card, which is fantastic. You get a lot of little incidental triggers, and it has a sack outlet stapled onto it, which makes it great for aristocrat builds. But maybe a bigger upside than all of that is this card is uncommon and it costs 30 cents. Try a new card in your cube, guys. It's 30 cents. 30 cents worth of fun. You probably just have it laying around in a box somewhere with your bulk Aether Revolt stuff. So pull it out and slide it into your cube and give it a try. Now, I will admit the cons. It's not a top 5 guild card, and if you are playing some heavily powered cube where every single spot is really hard to break into, I respect that you're not going to try Hidden Stockpile. And I do think it is a little archetype specific, but if you are in an unpowered cube, if you are playing aristocrats, or if you're in a peasant cube, especially if you're in a peasant cube, I think this card is a slam dunk. You should give Hidden Stockpile a whirl. I think you'll be really impressed. That's going to do it for today, cubers. Thanks for watching. If there's a card you want us to cover for Card of the Week, leave it in the comments below, and then do all the things like subscribe, follow us on Twitter at cubefortwo, and until next time, shuffle up and keep cubing, my friends.